for every learner. This learning experience is brought to you by the Supporting Innovative Practices Project, funded by the California Department of Education, Special Education Division. Thank you to CDE and our respective county offices of education in El Dorado County and Riverside County. This series is designed to bring educators, leaders, and support staff together to explore practical, classroom-ready strategies that strengthen students' planning, organization, self-regulation, and independence. Together, we will examine executive functions not as an add-on, but as an essential instructional framework, one that helps us intentionally design environments where all students can access learning and build the skills they need to be successful. Across our 3 sessions, we'll focus on how clear routines, systems, and modeling can reduce cognitive load and create more predictable, supportive learning spaces for every student. My name is Janelle Mercado. I'm the Assistant Director for SIP, and I'm joined today by our incredible SIP team who are here to support your learning and engagement throughout the series. We're also excited to be learning alongside all of you as we dig into this work together. A few logistics. This session will be recorded and archived on the Padlet and our website at sipimpact.org. We'll also be supporting this series with a shared Padlet of resources that our team is throwing in the chat now, I believe. So go ahead and access that resource from the chat, but you'll be able to access these resources and reflect in between sessions. Download your certificate of completion at the end of the series. And we also have ASL interpretation available throughout this series, who will be spotlit for all of you as a presenter. We've enabled closed captioning, and it's available if you click that CC button at the bottom of your screen. We encourage you to engage with one another throughout this series. So we've enabled the chat as a collaborative learning space so that you can share your insights. It's going to be a really important part of this book study experience. Also, if you prefer to engage out loud, we can unmute you. So if you just raise your hand, that lets us know that you prefer to engage in that manner. So we'll get to you as soon as we can by unmuting you. So make sure your microphones are connected there. Let's jump in. Executive functioning skills are often the invisible drivers to student success, yet they are rarely taught explicitly. Mitch Weathers challenges us to rethink that approach, offering practical strategies and routines that make these skills visible, teachable, and sustainable across classrooms. As we begin this first session, we invite you to think about your own context. Where do students struggle with organization, planning, or independence? And how might intentional struggles help bridge those? How might intentional planning and structures help bridge those gaps? Not struggles, structures. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Mitch.
Thanks, Janelle. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. We're excited to finally kick this book study off. We had this idea many months ago, so thanks for being here and joining us live today. I'm going to share my screen just for a little bit, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, to kind of summarize in some ways the chapters in the book that we'll be covering. Also give a little bit of an introduction to myself, just in case maybe you're unfamiliar with me or my work and just saw, hey, a book study. And if you were the first 300, you got your free book and all of that. So that's what we're going to do. Here we go. I hope, with that in mind, I hope you brought something to write with and take notes. I'm actually going to ask you to write a few things down, not a lot. And forgive me, I'm going to move quite fast during this portion of our time together to really leave room for the dialogue after. Our hope, I don't want to echo what Janelle said, that this is really a conversation. We're really looking forward to like, what are your takeaways? What are your questions? What do we want to dialogue about? Whether you're engaging in the chat, and again, remember, you can just raise your hand because we would love to hear someone's voices besides our own, but chat is good too. So let me jump in here. Let the Zoom window go away. So here we are, everybody. Executive Functions for Every Classroom. That's the name of my first book there. I'm Mitch Weathers, and thank you to SIP for making this whole thing happen. They've organized it. They've just done a ton of work behind the scenes, so I'm happy to show up and be here with you all. And if you didn't know, there's 3 sessions. This is the first one, part one. And what we're going to be discussing and really chatting about this afternoon or evening, depending on where you're coming from, is the introduction and then the first 3 chapters of that book. So hopefully you have something to write with. Hopefully you have your book and your notes, and let's jump in. So if you don't know me, again, my name's Mitch Weathers, and I spent the majority of my career at Sequoia High School in Redwood City, California, teaching 9th grade science. And during that time, I designed a program that's known as Organized Binder, which is a program kind of targeted middle, upper elementary, middle school, high school, and colleges to support, you guessed it, the development of executive functioning skills. And I bring that up only because that's not what our book study is about. But there is a materials component, and you'll see some of this probably in the our time together, and if certainly you've seen some of the images if you have read the book or even thumbed through the book. And since I designed that program, I've had consistently teachers or individual families, parents reach out and want to bring this program because they see the need either in their child or in their students, these signs of executive dysfunction. And because there's a material and a training support portion or part to the program, we don't interface or sell that to individual teachers. I'm just kind of morally opposed to that. So my effort in my first book was to translate the strategies inherent to Organized Binder, to ground it in the research that is backing Organized Binder. And that's what we're going to be discussing in these 3 sessions together. And you probably know all that if you've jumped into the book. And I bring that up because I think that's pretty obvious. You have the book and you're here. But what's interesting is this first book came out in March of 2024 and has just been really well received from day one. Which is just evidence of we're hungry for this. We're seeing these signs of executive dysfunction, and how do we make that practical for our classrooms? But one piece of consistent feedback since March of 2024 were the primary folks, grades K, 1, 2, and 3. And this won't really be the focus of our time together. Of course, we're just going to stick to this book, but just again, as an introduction to me, about 3 weeks ago, my second book was published. You can see by the same name, Executive Functions, but for every K3 classroom. And I'm excited to share a little bit about that with you if you're interested. But for our purposes, we're going to look at book 1. Now, for the record, horrible presentation style here. Way too much stuff on the screen. Don't ever do this if you're presenting or if you're a classroom teacher. But I did it on purpose. I don't want to draw your attention to the research on the far right, the references. The way it's impacting and relevant in the middle. What I want to draw your attention to is this left-hand column and really thank you, whatever you do in this space, or even if you're not in education and you're here, if you're interested in learning how to support the development of executive functions, how to teach these executive functions to young people, you are doing them a lifelong favor. Of course, we're going to talk mostly about school readiness and school success and what's this look like in actual classrooms. But just as a quick glance, this is a foundational study by Adele Diamond. It was published in 2013. And the impact, and this is just one snapshot of a much larger study, but look at the impact that these executive functions have on humans long term. So just kudos to you for being here and caring about kids enough to try to set them up for success. So we thought it'd be a good point to just place to start is just a definition. What are these things? They're actual cognitive processes. Executive functions are cognitive processes that control goal-oriented behavior. And what I'm really passionate about is, okay, that's interesting, and it really is. The research, the brain scans, like we know where this is happening in the brain, and that's all good. But if I'm a practitioner, if I'm working and interfacing with young people, what's that mean for me tomorrow or next week in my classroom or whatever your learning environment or your setting is? And so in the classroom, we're looking for behaviors, right? So these executive functions in the classroom, these are behaviors that allow students to pay attention, manage their time, get organized, complete tasks. Some of what Janelle was just talking about. And so one way to think about it is you'll hear executive functions and you'll hear executive functioning skills. The skills are those behaviors we're trying to spot as they're developing in students in our classrooms. So keep that in mind. Keep that word behaviors in mind. And I actually try to steer away, and you know this if you've read the book, from more academic sounding definitions. And I use this one word studentness. And if you haven't yet, write that word down, because a school reached out to my team and I had organized Binder a few years ago, and they said, we're on a mission to develop this sense of studentness in our students. And I heard that and thought, I love that to summarize this idea of executive functioning. And if we were all together in real space, I'd ask you, like, what is that? What do you see? What do you like? What does that mean to you, a young person that's developing this sense of studentness? And for me, it's always been that like sense of agency or that sense of dexterity, and most importantly, like this like I got it, like I know how to do school. So when I see a young person starting to develop their executive functioning skills, I'm seeing a young person with a sense of studentness. Now, what the research spells out or defines as two categories of executive functions. The first being core EFs, that working memory, inhibition, and cognitive flexibility. This is a graphic from that second blue book. Those developmentally are happening in the primary years. And I bring that up. Again, we're not going to talk about this second book, but even though developmentally it's these core executive functions are starting to emerge in our youngest students, they're absolutely applicable to K-12 and even into college. So one of my hesitations with the second book was even putting K through 3 on there, kinder through third, because I don't want anybody on the call to think that that's not applicable to them. What we're really going to be talking about is the higher order executive functions. And again, the cognitive processes you can see there: planning, problem solving, reasoning. I'll get to the skills in a moment. But I just want you to know that these are really kind of brought to you by the core executive functions. And it's biology. This is a developmental thing. And it's important for us to understand that, especially in the younger years, because we want to have grade level and age appropriate expectations on students when it comes to executive functioning. And if they're just starting to emerge in a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, being aware of that can really help them be successful. So if you have read the book and you're into the research, there's no question, the jury's not out on this, that executive functions set young people up for success in school and in life. I just mentioned a little bit of the research with Adele Diamond. So we have this issue that I refer to as kind of the order of operations, because if they lay the foundation for success, then we want students to be successful. Why don't we do that first, right? What if we could just spend the first quarter of the school year teaching executive functions? Well, of course we can't do that. We don't have time for that. And so what I'd like you to write down or think about is this has to be mixed up in the things you're already doing if you're a teacher on the call. It has to be concurrent. And in order for it to be concurrent, it can't get in the way of what you're already doing. It can't have a large time footprint, because it's just not realistic to be incorporated. So I hope you got from the book and this chat today that it's just mixed up in the things we do. And I always like to start with this analogy that if we think of a child's educational journey over the course of a school year as analogous to picking a destination on a topographic map. By the way, I'm a geology undergrad with a minor in geography. So I have an affinity for maps and compasses and rulers and stuff. So just roll with me on this. But we'll say that destination on the topographic map is academic success over the course of a school year. And we would, of course, equip them with the devices and the resources, the things that you need to successfully navigate your way on your journey. And then first we have to figure out where we are on the map and do that. And then once we've done that, because you can't navigate if you don't know where you are, we would set out on the journey over the course of the school year together. And you might ask yourself, in this era of AI, generative AI, and education technology, like, why not just plug it into an app? There's an app for that, right? It can just take us there. And I now have the privilege of working with schools and educators around the country and internationally. And there's this growing sense of dysregulation, kind of as if, or executive dysfunction, where if you follow the analogy, it's like they're out in the wilderness, right? Where they're so far out in the wilderness where there is no signal, there is no GPS to rely on. And although we've equipped them with devices and resources and technology, and dare I say, we over equip students at times, if they lack the basic know how, the basic skill set, the basic executive functions to utilize those devices and resources, it's just more stuff to carry on the journey. And that's where, if you get into the research, there's a specific set of executive functioning skills that really set students up for success. And again, if you've read the book, you've seen that graphic. So I've never met an adult, an educator, a parent that thinks it's a bad idea for young people to develop and get practice with all of these, right? But they have been kind of left up to chance. We historically haven't explicitly taught them. And in the book, I talk about this, that there's two reasons I really believe this. Is first, I mentioned it already, time crunch. Like, you're never going to find a teacher walking around looking for something else to do. We don't have enough time in the school day, and we certainly don't have enough time in the school year most of the time to get through what we're either tasked with teaching or we want to teach. So we're already under this time crunch. Even if I wanted to teach it, where am I going to fit it in? Which is good because I'm not here to introduce you to a curriculum. And the other is the zone of genius. And I explain, whenever I talk about this, my mom taught second grade her whole career. And I would walk into her room and you could just feel it. Like that was my mom's zone of genius. And interestingly, we all have different zones of genius. I'd last about 5 minutes in that classroom and be exhausted by all these smelly little kids that wanted to touch me because I'm Mrs. Weather's son and they were smiling at me. I always would say, like, give me 36 15-year-olds that don't want to be at school and don't smile. And I'm like, I got this. I'm good at that. I like that space. And then you combine these two. I don't have much time, and I may not know how to incorporate retrieval practice to flex a student's working memory on a daily basis, right? Some of that may not be in your zone yet, and then you got that book, so hopefully you're feeling it is. And you can kind of see why these were left up to chance. And we can't afford to make that mistake any longer. Second word I want you to write down: environment. If we can improve a child's environment in specific ways that lead to better executive functioning, we can increase their prospects for success in a particularly efficient way. So, as I mentioned, we're not here to introduce you to a curriculum. This is about intentionally and mindfully shaping the learning environment in ways that lead to better executive functioning. And there's this really interesting study from the 1970s, Herbert Simon. And he tells the story of this ant walking across a beach, making its way home. And his whole point is the ant's experience and the ant's behavior is entirely determined by the environment. So if it's a placid beach, it's going to walk quietly and find its way home. If it's a chaotic beach, it's going to be a chaotic experience. And that's why all of us here as educators, we don't just leave it up to nature. We craft artificial environments, right? This is why the deliberate construction of artificial environments designed with the learner's cognitive architecture in mind. It's not the compromise, it's the entire point. So we're thinking about our instruction, our environment, the physical things, our routines in ways that is reducing cognitive load and increasing the development of executive dysfunction. I'm going to add a little bit longer, Sarah, introduction, but I'm going to stop myself right here after this slide, and we can jump in. I might come back to it, okay? One thing I do want to make very loud and clear: when we think of signs of executive dysfunction, we really have to be careful that we have our asset-focused executive functioning glasses on, right? As opposed to deficit focus, what the student can't do, what the student's not bringing to school. And I love how this is phrased, that executive dysfunction is about the person and their environment. It's not the person alone, okay? And with that, keep symptoms of executive dysfunction, think of them as signs of potential trouble in your learning environments and the unmet needs of your student. The word there is just approach it with curiosity, right? You might be seeing off-task behaviors. You might be seeing disruptive behaviors. You might be apathy, disengagement. And although that can be challenging and even frustrating at times, I get it, taught for many years, start to think about it with that sense of curiosity with your executive functioning glasses on and start thinking about, okay, what's going on here that might be contributing to signs of executive dysfunction, and how can I shape my environment in ways that reduces that and sets them up for success. So let's jump in. Introduction. We're probably going to start there and then make our way through the chapters. Yeah, Sarah? What do you think?
Love it.
Okay. I was going to keep going, and I think I may have overplanned, but I can come back to it.
I haven't introduced myself. I'm Sarah. I'm a program specialist with SIP. I read the book prior to meeting Mitch. I love the book. It's simple, it's an easy entry point. That is my favorite part of this entire thing. But what I want to start with out of the introduction, Mitch, I want to talk about learning routines. I want to talk about specifically what you wrote about students expend less cognitive energy in learning environments with clear routines and agreements. That was a quote by Oakley and others. And I want to talk about the clear routines because
Mm-hmm.
in on the Padlet, we have a bunch of resources, and there's one where you work with Cambridge in particular, and there's a video, and Professor Baker, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's Professor, yes, Professor
Yeah.
Baker, she talks about routines relieving the burden of working memory. And why is that important for kids? Because what I see often now is people saying, I don't need to remember that. I can just look it up. How does that impact our classroom instructional practice?
Yeah. Good. Good. And I love how you asked about routines and then instruction. When I think instruction, I'm thinking content delivery in that craft. And when we think of routines, step back in any learning space and just let's just all understand that ambiguity is the enemy. And students can spend a significant amount of their cognitive resources, which you've is working memory, and working memory has a capacity to it. It's finite in all of us. That's not a student thing, that's a human thing. But it's the engine for learning. And so what we want to do is protect that precious working memory capital to focus on things like managing myself, managing my interactions with others, focusing on the learning at hand. And so the more predictable the learning environment, the more likely things are just going to become automatic for students. Okay, so if I have to stop and think, it's the whole reason we drill our times tables. Here's a perfect example. If I
Yeah.
ask anyone on the call, what's 4 times 5? And hopefully, I would imagine most of you said 20. No working memory at all. But if you're my youngest kid who's learning that, she's probably going to go either 4, 8, 12, or maybe she's doing it in her head, or 5, 10. Right. If I have to pause and think, that's what we would refer to as cognitive load. And I'm infringing upon that. So when we step back and look at the environment, I'll just say the classroom, if that same thing is happening, because I'll just speak from my own personal teaching experience. My kids had 7 classes a day. Some of the days, other days there was 4 classes. Some were 40 minutes, some were 50 minutes, some were 100 minutes. I tell stories in the book of 10 class periods a day. But now I'm coming into Mr. Weather's science class, and let's say that's fourth period. I just came from English, and in English we start this way, but in science we start this way. I have to this. All that negotiation is taking up working memory. That's bandwidth. It's infringing. It's cognitive load. And then there's other things that students are carrying. For many of my students, it was translating everything they're reading, everything they're hearing, because they're multi-language learners. Um, Pick anything you want. What we want to do is have those executive functioning glasses on and go, okay, so what can I do in my sphere of influence, which is where I start in the book, and I can reduce the cognitive load, the extraneous cognitive load, whenever possible. And I can show you that real quick. Can I show you something?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to share this because I way overplanned. I thought this was going to be a 10-minute intro. And clearly it's not. But when we think of cognitive load, and I just want to continue to share. Can you see that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So this green brain would represent, and you can see in the upper left-hand corner, routine. This green brain is representing the working memory capacity of a student. Cognitive load sometimes gets a bad rap, right? Not all cognitive load is bad and something we want to get rid of. What if you're taking notes, write this down. The intrinsic load, okay? That's the cognitive load that's the stuff of learning, teaching and learning. Intrinsic load is what we do every day as teachers. It's learning new things. It's connecting new things to stuff I already know. It's all of that stuff of learning. But even intrinsic load can be too much. It can be too heavy. For example, right, if my content volume is too much, if I don't know that 4 times 5, and I'm just expecting that you can in order to do what we're doing next in this math class, I'm running into an issue. You don't have the background or the foundational knowledge. That's too much. Maybe the volume's too much on what I'm teaching, whatever it might be. I always liken it to, if anyone on the in the class today has heard me speak, I equate it to skeletal system health. Right? We all know that mechanical stress on our bones, on our skeletal system, is a good thing. If we mechanically stress our bones, they are actually getting stronger and more dense. Now, too much mechanical stress, not good. Fracture, break the bone. Too little, we actually start losing bone density and our bones become fragile. So there's a science to teaching, a lot of what we're going to talk about today, and then there's also an art. Like, where's that balance of that intrinsic load with the kids that I have in the room? So not all cognitive load is bad, but what we're talking about, with the capacity that I am using just to navigate the school day or navigate the ambiguity in a lesson or a classroom, that's referred to as the extraneous load. And the more I'm having to use for anything that doesn't directly contribute to learning, I just have less available. And when I have less capacity, here's the crossroads or the nexus between executive functions and classroom management and behaviors. Because if I'm feeling overwhelmed, another way to say it is if cortisol levels are rising for me, executive functioning is going down. And that's a human thing, that's not a student thing. So thinking about this working memory capacity is like precious real estate. To save it for as much as we can for that intrinsic load can really be helpful for students. And routines make that a possibility.
You know what it makes me think of is learning to drive a car, how stressful that was.
Mm-hmm.
And you're learning all of the rules and routines of the road. Then you get good at it, you forget where you're going. You're like, "Oh, did I already pass that?" You're just so good at it now.
Yeah.
You have the
Yeah.
routine down for your drive to work. You don't even have to think about it.
Right. Right. 100%.
I love this.
So,
Don German, how it makes sense considering why our students struggle with initiation of task. I love that, Don, because that is a piece of engagement too. Why engagement's so challenging, initiating that task and getting into it if they're not understanding the routine.
right. And part of that, we'll get into in subsequent chapters, or at least our studies, like task initiation, just taken all by itself. Well, I should say it this way: it can't be taken all by itself.
Right.
Because if there's ambiguity around routine, or I can't find my materials to even get started, if I don't have that clear picture of what it means to be doing what I'm doing, all of that, I'm kind of swimming in the seas of ambiguity.
And that makes it challenging, especially for our littlest learners
Yeah,
who haven't
right,
gotten the flow of studentness.
right, right. Shall we throw it out for the so
Um,
again, everybody, our hope here is a more of a Q&A with you all. What questions do you have from the introduction? And what stood out to you? What were your takeaways? Remember, you can always raise your hand
mhm.
and use your lovely voice, but
And
chat
Mitch,
is totally fine too.
we do have our first. How do you teach that within SDI?
With an
Specially designed instruction
How
is
do
what
I
I'm thinking
teach
that is.
teach? Yeah, tell us
How do
what
you
SDI is. Is that what it
what
is, especially?
I'm guessing it's specially designed instruction. And then what
Janelle
I
says yes.
am hearing from your question, Amanda, and correct me if I'm wrong. So how do you teach the routine within SDI? Is that correct? Because she's going to be a special ed teacher if she's asking about that. And so, how is she going to teach that routine? So, think about that. You're going to have smaller groups, you're going to have groups that go in and out, Mitch. It's not going to be a general education setting where you
Got it.
start the morning with a group and
Yep.
Or it
Yeah.
could
So,
be in an inclusive classroom where we have co-teaching
true,
and you have a teacher alongside a general education teacher, right?
true, true.
Or a paraeducator delivering some of that instruction in an inclusive setting alongside your general education teacher, while they're delivering the core instruction.
mhm. Okay. So all good questions, all good comments. You'll see if you haven't, but if you read this first book, I'm advocating for this to be a tier one, an MTSS tier one implementation. And I only bring that up if somebody is finding themselves in a special ed role, which would make a lot of sense that you're here on this call with us, if that's you. There's, and let me just throw it out to the audience. I'm more than willing to one-on-one with you on the backside of this book study, if that would be helpful. So if you have like something like, hey, I really want, keep the questions coming now, but I just want to throw that out there. One of the ideal situations is when this work is implemented, when this routine is implemented as a tier one, that's in the gen ed classroom, all kids in there, the most least restrictive environment, right? And we might have other educators in the room that are supporting specific students. And that can be helping and supporting with that daily routine. Excuse me. In the special ed or in that support role in a different geography, a different classroom on campus, what's ideal is when you also know the routine that's taking place in the core classroom and that routine is shared by the math. I'm thinking secondary right now, by the math, the history, right? So it's a common routine that's reducing cognitive load, making collective teacher efficacy a reality on campus, which consistently has the highest effect size, which means it's really helpful. And and then the support in the special ed setting or in that support setting can be one of two things. It could be one, and we work with schools. It's like, hey, part of coming here is just bring your math binder because we're going to be small grouping in math or whatever it might be, but being mindful of and in on the routine that's happening in that tier one space. Now, if your setting in an SDI setting is self contained, and maybe that's not the reality where we're going back and forth, that's fine. In that sense, you're the content area teacher of record, right? And in that case, you're going to establish routine, whatever that content is that you're delivering or teaching would be embedded into the routine. And this routine has a really small time footprint. So whatever that curriculum is, and again, I don't quite know what it is, it can be embedded into that routine. And what's really cool is if that matches the tier one, there's a lot of really inclusive feelings happening on campus. So I hope that answers the question.
I love that. And there are so many great comments supporting what you just said. Casey said, consistent routine for small groups for your time with each group, common routine that's focused on less words, more visuals, tools that are accessible and part of the routine.
Well,
I
what
Mm-hmm.
love
also
that.
stands out to me so significantly in reading your book, Mitch, is how important it is that we're modeling in the authentic environment, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how very often we'll separate the teaching of executive functioning skills outside of a general education classroom, right? Like
Right.
that would be when I first started as an ed specialist, that would have been what I did in a separate setting, but how then we struggle with that generalization of skills in the general education classroom. So
Right.
if we kind of flip that and just think in terms of bring those bring that intentionally designed focus and practice into the general education classroom, model it, practice it over and over, there's an inclusive practice that you have now created a bridge to a general education setting through your
Mm-hmm.
SDA.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. 100%. And and I will add to that, Janelle, that it has to be implementable in that tier one space. And so when a school or a district, and this happens with some frequency, they'll reach out and say, you you're the executive functioning guy. We want to buy a curriculum. And I say, no, sorry, I'll look at whatever you think. I'll help you however I can, but it's not done that way. That these I make the point of clarity, modeling, routine in the book that it's in the air we breathe, right? It's concurrent, but it has to be implementable by the teacher because the teacher has a job to do, and I can almost bet you they weren't hired to teach executive functioning skills. And so finding that where sometimes the initiative's like, how this just isn't realistic for me to bring it into this space, but when it is just what you're talking about starts to flourish. And the research, the kind of technical ease on that is there's something called near transfer and far transfer. Near transfer, you see signs of near transfer, which is I learned something, a skill or a habit or whatever, in this particular setting or environment, and I can replicate that in similar environments. Far transfer is I've learned it, it's now my own, and I find myself in a different environment, right? And I can somehow find that and utilize it and be successful with it. My birthday was in March, and I had a former student well out of college. She wrote in and she had me in ninth grade, right? So this has been a long time. And she said, she wrote to me on Instagram and said, Mr. Weathers, I just had to wish you happy birthday and thank you. She said, was going for a promotion at work. And what I did is I recreated the organized binder you taught me in ninth grade in my science class. I didn't teach her. It's just what we use. She said, I got a binder. I reinvented the little tabs with sticky notes and I three-hole punched everything and I put everything. I don't even know what she recreated, right? And she said, and I got the promotion. And now my company is asking me to teach that to all my colleagues so that they can do the same. And I thought, that's far transfer. You're not in my science class. You're not in school. And I thought, wow, that's powerful. That became this like transferable competency. But that only happens through repetition over time, which is the whole point of the routine and the modeling you're talking about. Day after day after day, I'm just trying this over and over. It doesn't matter if I get it right or wrong. Pretty soon it becomes mine. I
Mitch,
think
we've
you've
had
okay.
a lot
Oh,
of
sorry.
really good questions.
Okay.
I want
We better
to
get to
go
them.
start to finish, yeah, from the chat. So, what might you say to a teacher who says, I'm going to take away the cognitive load by doing away with the direct instruction? So, we might need them to raise their hand in support. So, I'm going to take away the cognitive load by doing away with the direct instruction. So, maybe thinking about
Okay.
using,
I think I could jump in there.
okay,
So I'm assuming and keep putting that in the chat and let me know, Sarah, if I'm on the right track here. If you're speaking about clarity, modeling, and routine, like what our Waldorf friends would say, the rhythm and routine of the day, it just becomes automaticity. It becomes automatic. No words, no direct instruction. Now, at first, you might have to explain it. I advocate for actually modeling it. If anything we can do to use fewer words tends to be a good thing, right? So if I can show
yeah,
you what the routine looks like. Now, I want to say that about this work with executive functions. When it comes to content, the grade level specific standards or curriculum or objectives that we're tasked with teaching, direct instruction is a great tool at times. Direct instruction for an hour, not a great use. But I just want to be clear that what we choose to use direct instruction for, there are times where it's like, I need to explain this to you. I'm the expert, or I'm giving you explicit directions. Like, so I'm not saying direct instruction is a bad thing. I'm just hope I'm interpreting that correctly.
I hope so too. If you don't, if comment if that's not what answered your question. I love
Okay.
this one too. When you began your executive function work in the classroom, was it a school-wide initiative? If not, how did you get your colleagues to get on board? I imagine as they see the positives come out of your class, they will ask what you are doing, but I also know not everyone is looking at what other classrooms are doing. That question is so important because I love talking about how K through 12, there needs to be some alignment to keep that consistent routine.
Yeah. Yeah. Great question.
Hmm.
And I'll just tell you my story. I had no intention of sharing what I was working on with anybody else. I was just trying to I just felt like something was missing. And, I was working primarily with multi language learners. My master's degree is in cross cultural pedagogy. So I'm supposed to be the person that knows, right? Like, what's missing here? And what was really interesting when over the course of about 2 or 3 years of just iterating, this organized binder routine, this program started to coalesce. And it was really interesting to see the student pride. Like they had a portfolio, they
Hmm.
had a binder, they had an organized binder. They would say that. That's why the name stuck. I never named the program. It came from the students. But so much so, and again, I was working with students for whom, academic success was kind of elusive for many of them. And they were rocking it. What's interesting, just even organization, I mean, there's clear data. I have data from other teachers' grade books. When students know how to get and stay organized, the zeros go down and the grades go up, and they start to feel better about themselves. Not just that, we could talk about goal setting, time management, but here's what happened to the story. How do you get buy-in? Now, if you work at a campus or in a district where you're like, ooh, they're all skeptical, they're all the naysayers, and they exist, that's fine. Just get to work yourself. And what happened was other colleagues started popping by. Nick Muse, first one, English teacher, ninth grade, stops by, still a friend of mine today because of this. He was like, what is going on in here? Because the kids, the students were talking about this binder in Mr. Weather's class. They weren't talking about science and the labs I was doing and killing myself trying to, all my lessons. They were talking about their organized binder. And he says, they love it. What are you doing? And I said, hey, I'm doing this. I go, of course, I just gave this is what it is. Talked about the
Right.
routine. Another teacher came by. Another teacher came by. So I actually didn't work to advocate. What happened was the next year, not my decision, we adopted organized binder in every class in ninth grade. And all of a sudden, which was actually really kind of strange, for the first time in my life, I found myself in this kind of consulting, training, support role, which is kind of the hat I wear now, right? But it's with all my colleagues. And it's something that I just kind of made up. But what was cool is I went from class to class. I saw these different contexts and I saw the power, like the cohesion. And I mentioned this before, it was collective efficacy. But I also mentioned this to Janelle's point, they have to be implementable. The good thing about this work is we could do that across the school in ninth grade because it's content area, it's subject area, and it's grade level agnostic. It's clarity, modeling, and routine. And you take your curriculum and you just pop it down in there. And now all of a sudden we have a common language, we have a common expectation. It was really powerful. So what I didn't do is go around, to each class and be like, hey, I designed this binder. You guys should do it. It was more just the evidence. But I'll throw
Right.
this out there to anybody. What I do a lot now is just introductions to a school that might be curious about this work, and you invite your colleagues, and it's enough information to have an internal dialogue if this is something you want to engage in. So I hope that's helpful.
I'm going to go to one. I'm skipping around a little bit because this one fits that last conversation. I'm wondering how much time you use to do the organized binder routines, like the weekly lifeline and agenda items, or continuing to model executive function skills with your class. I feel like this is a great segue for you to really start talking about the routine.
Mm-hmm.
What does that routine really look like? What does it look like to embed this? Because I want to remind you're not teaching it, you're modeling it.
You're
And so
doing
what
it.
does it look like in that routine?
Yeah. Great question. And it's important to, you know, time that instruction time is certainly in a secondary environment where I'm not self-contained. That's sacred time that we have to honor. And I tell a story in a book, like well, here's what's interesting. Once the routine's in place, teachers report back that they have more time for teaching and learning. So it feels like, oh, I'm adopting this routine and I'm keeping a class sample to model it, which literally everybody on the call takes like 2 or 3 minutes before school to update. So I have that sample of what students' binders should look like. But once the routine is in place, the time it takes is entirely predicated on what's being the content you're covering. So the basics of it here, and I can even screen share and show you, maybe we'll do that next time or later. We're starting with a prompt, right? In Organized Binder, we call it a kickoff. If you read the book, you know I'm saying that's just what we call it. There's a reason for it, because what I wanted my students to know when they arrive, speaking of time and losing time, I wanted them to know what it was looked like to be ready to engage before they even showed up. And if I had that kind of clarity, what I knew, what it looked like to be on time, we have no business even talking about accountability until we have that kind of clarity. But if I can say, here, I've painted this gray area black and white, this is exactly what it looks like, and you can do it. It's not like something hard. You're in your assigned seat with your binder open to this B page. That's why I organize binders colored. The one in front of it's gold, the one behind it's green. I can just see. You can see. There's 36 kids in the class. I have 35 other visual reminders. That's all the modeling that Janelle was just talking about. And that type of clarity speeds up the time. So we're starting with a prompt and we're looking back. It's incorporating what's called retrieval practice and spaced retrieval, which are the holy grail for long-term retention. So I'm constantly just coming back to the things we're learning, the things we're studying. I don't care if it's right or wrong. We're just interacting with the material. Now, the time question is, one, how much time do I have? Do I have you for half an hour? Do I have you for 2 hours? Do I have you all day? That's going to determine the prompt that I ask. So if I have some time, let's dive deep. If I'm short on time, let's do some quicker recall, clear up some misconceptions, and then move on. Second step is practicing time management calendar. So how much I ask you to write in your, for us, it's called the agenda in the C page. How much I ask you to write down is going to determine how much time I'm using. And again, economics of time. That might be time well spent. I've had so many times in my career where I thought we needed to go quick, right? I had all this stuff we needed to do in the
Yeah.
lesson that day. And there's clearly misconceptions. And my kickoff is going like 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute. Like we're like 7 minutes in, and I'm going, oh my gosh, my whole plan. And then I'd have to pause and say, what was I thinking of moving on if there's this kind of lack of clarity, misconceptions? We got to talk about this stuff now, and I'll just adjust moving on. So that really is a content area, how much time I have and how I'm using the routine. And if I want it to be quick, then I use less. Brevity is king. And if I have a little bit more time, I can slow down a little bit. So I hope that's helpful. But what's really interesting is when the routine is in place, you will find you have more teaching and learning time. There's just less ambiguity, right? And I've done the timing. I tell stories if you've read the whole book. I've sat in classrooms where high school classrooms that are 42 minutes long and it took 20 minutes to get started. And not trying to be a Debbie Downer here, but when I talked to the teacher, guess whose fault it was? Just take a guess, Sarah.
Students wouldn't settle
It was
down.
the students. And I thought, huh. And then I went back the next day and the next day. I was at this school 3 days just to see if it was routine. Because I've also heard this, everybody, like I just don't have time for routines. I don't have routines. And what I always say is, yes, you do. A lack of routine is routine, and kids will know that and
They
adapt.
do.
So if I know I got 20 minutes, of course I'm going to talk to my neighbor or take a nap. But if I know I have 5 seconds, all of a sudden I find I have a lot more teaching and learning time. Yes, I just saw structure.
I have another good comment that goes with this. I still have a handful or more of my class that does not do their weekly lifeline. Their engagement with it just isn't there. What would be your recommendation to her to support that engagement?
Yeah. Great question. Whoever asked that. And nothing is a panacea that's going to fix everything. So it's what we're doing in conjunction with that. So the starting place when I'm mentoring teachers around this question, first thing is, sometimes like when we got to look at that disengagement and really try to figure out, what's going on there. Like what's disengagement brought to you by what? Is it that I'm like totally confused and I don't know, I just don't know? That could be it. Is it willful defiance? Could be. Is it, well, who knows, right? So that's the curiosity piece that we start with. But I always, highly recommend starting with your seating chart. I am a big proponent of assigned seating. And for me, my seating chart, now that doesn't mean we can't move around and have freedom and flexibility in the classroom, but my seating chart was like a chessboard. I was constantly monitoring that, thinking about, okay, who's sitting by who? Well, okay, I'm seeing this going on. That kid's just sitting there not doing the weekly lifeline if you're organized binder speak. And I could encourage certain students by placing other students around him. I had one student, I'm not going to mention his name, I can still picture him viscerally in my head. And I had a moat of really motivated and on task female students that sat around him, like literally
Smart.
around him. And I would just say, hey, can you make sure, get him, I could say his name. Maybe he's on the call. Maybe it's teacher now. And there's things like having some fun, and then there is the content volume. That's something to consider. Like, what am I asking them to do? Is it possible? Because it's important. School should be hard. School should be effortful. Not all the time, but there's that same thing, kind of like that intrinsic load. So we got to consider that, and then there's your own proximity. I had many classes where I stood by a handful of students the whole time we kicked the lesson off. I never was in the front of the class. I had my little clicker and I could do my thing, and I just sat right next to them. Proximity. Hey, what are you doing? You need to write that down. That's what we're doing. Right? So there's a lot of conversations there. And then when all of that kind of clarity, modeling, it's the routine, it's what we're doing, and you still can't. It's either a tier 2 consideration. Like, hey, I'm curious, well, what's going on here? And maybe there's something I just don't know as the gen ed teacher that I need to know about. Or it is defiance. And these are kids. And we might have to have a more pointed conversation. I might call home. There's some things we can do. So that's a great question with a really long answer. And I hope I provided some help there. And one more thing.
Go for it.
With Organized Binder, we call that the weekly lifeline. We kick the lesson off, and at the end, we reflect. It's called the learning log. All of it is formative feedback for the teacher. It's why it's designed. Tell me what you're learning. Tell me what's confusing. Talk to me. I don't care if you get it right or wrong. I want to have a one-on-one, private, ongoing conversation with you. I don't have time to do that every day. I don't have time to do that every day in a self-contained class with 20 kids. But we could write to each other. We could talk to each other, and I could look at it daily. I could collect it weekly. And what I stumbled upon is, by definition, a formative assessment has no point value. It's not graded. So it's not in my content or area of my grade book. I'd always have a participation or some type of category like that so I could weight it accordingly. And I gave my students 5 points a week, which is 1 point a day, for just showing up, engaging with me. And I had some really disengaged, really troubled youth in my classroom. I had opposite gangs in my classroom. It was like I was on all school day, right? And I just asked them, I said, hey, I'm asking you to show up on time. That's what it looks like. And this is what we're going to do at the end. And if you do that with me, I'll give you 5 points a week, right? I didn't say what category it was in. I just said 5 points a week. And I said, let's do the math on that. I go over the board. So we have 18 weeks on average times 5. Someone do the math for me. Yeah, that's 90 points. Most of my tests are worth like 60. So if you just show up and do this with me, and I'm asking you, I don't care if you get it right or wrong, just engage with me. And then I would go into the science of learning stuff because kids find it really fascinating. Like, here's what's happening with your brain. And I would make fun of myself. I know I'm nerding out about this. I'm a teacher, blah, blah, blah. It's interesting, right? Like, oh, this is actually how we learn. That's not a mystery anymore, right? And I'm going to give you 5 points. So I'd always tell them there's this academic strategy that no one's for some reason ever teaches you. And I'm going to teach you. I'm going to let you in on the secret. They did this every year. In every class and grade level you'll ever take the rest of your life, in that class, there's going to be easy points to earn, and there's going to be some that are really challenging. And there's going to be some in this class that are really challenging. This is one that's really easy. And the strategy is find out which ones are easy and make sure you get every single one of them because it gives you a little padding for the stuff that's really hard. So those were all some of my strategies for engaging them at the beginning. And I'd bring donuts sometimes.
I would have nailed the participation points.
Yeah.
To me, though, it's a great little crosswalk to UDL because also if you're getting those points and you're giving them the opportunity to obviously you have a prompt, but say they drew you a comic strip about background information that you had just taught yesterday, you would still count that. I would reward
100%.
those items because they're showing me what they know in whatever capacity they are choosing to do, and they're still getting the point for just participating. So
Oh,
I love it as an
absolutely.
opportunity too to give them a little freedom and creativity
Mhm.
in what they're representing for what they remembered from yesterday.
Yeah. In fact, in actual organized binder trainings, we do a whole section on here's what it could look like. It doesn't just have to be write the prompt and respond. It can be
Yeah.
we have stuff from schools where students are acting it out, drawing it out. They're
Yes.
doing different things because it's a demonstration of understanding or confusion. This is confusing me, and this is how I'm demonstrating it. So absolutely UDL.
Um,
UDL. I mean, we know with the new guidelines from CASA 3.0, I mean, executive functions, it's kind of like UDL brought to you by executive functions,
mhm.
right? Katie Novak and I talk about this all the time. Like it's UDL happens when executive functioning is in place. So kudos to all of you for being on this call.
Time.
Mhm.
Okay. Anything should we look to other chapters or we keep it open? What's going to serve
You
everybody
bet.
here the
I
best?
have one more thing from the chat, and then we can move on to, we'll finally get to chapter one.
Okay. Hey, that introduction is
I
thick
know
with
it's, yeah,
information.
it was a hot topic. I love this question. What's the best way to frame this in language that teaches understanding? We ask for implementation of accommodations, or that teachers understand. I misread that. I apologize. What's the best way to frame this in language that teachers understand? We ask for implementation of accommodations and supports using specific systems as a placeholder to reduce the cognitive load, but nothing is getting done. There is no buy in. Teachers say it's too much work to adapt everything the student needs.
Hmm. Fair question. Um, and I'm not going to pretend to have a coherent and answer because that's a real struggle in most, if not all, schools. That disconnect between accommodations and the gen ed space and this kind of the advocacy happening. I can hear it in the words of that. I'm assuming this is a teacher, but educator who's advocate like here's it's spelled out. We know how to help this kid. Here's the accommodations. We need to bring it into the gen ed, and you have the gen ed person saying like I am so maxed out I can't even, I'm just trying to get through the school day or the class period. So for me, I'm going to echo what I think I heard there is translating accommodations, IEPs, 504s, the language into, okay, what's that look like in the gen ed classroom? How can I realistically do that? Because I want to, but like for me, sometimes I'd have 46 kids in a class period. And, if you have a few kids or more with accommodations, if I'm not really tuned into that, and I've had many conversations with special ed teachers who are like, I'm supposed to be aware of the IEP goals, and I'm just going to be honest, they're all in a filing cabinet in the back of the room, and I'm trying to get through the day too. Like, so if they're going from there
Yeah.
and then into the gen ed, like it's really about open and scheduled, I think, communication, like almost designed into the master schedule where special education teachers and gen ed teachers are talking about kids and figuring out what that translation looks like. Do they need a little extra support? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's this um, our lack of communication, or there's something going on here that's causing problems for the student in the gen ed, which we may be able to fix by just some clarity around that. So again, I'm not trying to say I'm going to solve that problem, but I've lived that from the gen ed side, where someone comes in sometimes a little frustrated, like, hey, and like, oh, like I read that when I got the email about accommodations at the beginning of the year, and now we're in May and I forgot or something. So that consistent communication, does that, Janelle or Sarah, does that resonate with you?
I felt good about it. I think so often we can use as well the routines to support those accommodations as well,
Oh yeah.
because we want everyone to have access to accommodations to level that playing field so that
Mm-hmm.
kid's not the only one doing something. And
Right.
if you embedded that into some type of routine that everybody has access to, that would be really beneficial.
Now that's why I tell schools and districts like, hey, this is part of it. Tier one is for inclusion. What I don't want to see walking around your campus is the one kid with the IEP with the organized binder. That doesn't feel very inclusive.
Right.
But I was doing walkthroughs with a special ed director earlier this school year, semester one in Arizona, and she said, what we're loving, a couple things, is you walk into a classroom and they all have the same portfolio. So you can assume or make guesses about who's in the room, but you can't tell. Everybody looks the same. They're engaged in the same routine. They kind of look like students. Um, but more importantly, or maybe not more importantly, in addition to, she said, our folks that are in the classroom supporting students, what they'll say, and I've had this conversation quite a few times as well, it's like when I walk into a class with my kiddo that I'm working with or group of kids, and I can't figure out the routine or the expectations, how are the students
Yeah.
figuring out? But when I walk into this environment, it's so clear and so consistent. Now I can realistically support the student right with those accommodations. So,
And I especially, what I fell in love with your book for was I would teach it in the special ed classroom during an intervention period. School counselor would teach it during a pullout for executive function skill development. Then we'd push them back into the general ed classroom. It didn't get generalized. So we were teaching it in this little tiny pocket, and if we didn't have support from tier one, it went by the wayside. And I am not kidding you. I chased one kid with a backpack. I cleaned his backpack. I did all the things to provide it. And had we had a school wide system to support executive function skills, I would have been able to support what's being taught over there and reinforce it, just
mm-hmm.
continually reinforcing it rather than teaching it and hoping and crossing my
Yeah.
fingers, please. But every Friday, backpack clean day, it wasn't landing.
Well, and I think, and I saw this come up in the chat a few times, how this might require change in mindset. And there's questions coming up about how do we address this? How do we address the potential resistance? And Mitch, you beautifully said how everything we're talking about is meant to be a tier one support, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so often historically, like I'm putting my special education teacher hat on right now. These are skills that were not talked about. These are strategies that were not talked about. They were very deeply discussed in IEP meetings.
Yep.
They were almost always, or and are almost always included in IEP development and IEP goals. But what we're talking about here is all of these specialized skills that students with disabilities may require, but so often benefit every student.
Everyone.
Absolutely.
And the instructional, the teaching, the modeling, the clarity is what every child needs. And that's
Mm-hmm.
at the core of inclusion, right? We always
Right.
talk about the benefits of inclusion. One of those key benefits is so often this is support that every child needs.
Mm-hmm.
So it's at the
Mm-hmm.
heart of
Yeah.
inclusion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, interestingly, when Corwin and I first, the publisher of the two books, when we first were talking about book one, part of that process is competing titles. Can you send us competing titles? And I said, Sure, they're not going to be competing though. And I sent probably like 25 books on executive functions written for special education. And they said, when we say this phrase in education, it's almost always embedded in tier two to three, more likely special ed,
Yeah.
like you're saying, which is great. That's not to say
Yeah.
that's a bad thing. But again, in the absence of a tier one, you can't tier two yourself out of a tier one concern. And all kids will benefit from that, exposure to and practice with these skills. No
Well, and
question about
going
it.
back to the question before, Mitch, and how you approached it through collaborative effort, that's a huge benefit of inclusive practices. Yes, while we may have historically, we may have some of this knowledge that sits in special educators,
Yeah.
uh, because of what, for whatever reasons, we have professional learning for special educators on executive
Programming.
functioning, we have pre-service, but this is a benefit to inclusive practices, that collaborative effort. Utilize the expertise of your special educators to bring that through consultation, through coaching on an ongoing basis, not something we do once,
Hmm.
ongoing, so that it becomes regularity in practice.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Through
the
small group reinforcement support. So, doing it at the back of the class with a small group so that you can
absolutely.
really give detailed attention to it.
Or in that support class, like you're saying,
Hmm.
Sarah, to the point of like, well, we were doing it in my class and then sending them into the abyss of the gen ed space. Like, what's happening in there, and six different classes. And it's the exact same conversation for families trying to do this work at home, well intentioned. But it can tend to be the same thing where we're practicing this at home. I'm already at a battle because you come home from school and we got to talk about executive functioning and goal setting and getting all that. Um, and it's like, now I'm going to send you back to school where there's some systems, if any, some routines, if any, like it can be hard. So if you can bring it in and start having those conversations, which is one part of writing the book, was like, here's a really low cost mechanism to start the conversation. And it's not going to interfere. Any gen ed teachers on the call, I'm telling you right now, it's not going to interfere with your instruction. It does not infringe upon academic freedom. Do your thing. You need to do your thing. It's about clarity, modeling, and routine. And as a byproduct of that, the repetition that comes from routine. So each step of the routine I outline in the book, it's Doug Lamov says it this way, that consider one unmistakable driver of students' achievement carefully built and practice routines. Well, that carefully built part, I would advocate for routine for the sake of routine, no matter what. Like, this is just what we do. We do the same thing every day. Good, I say. But carefully built means, what's the point of the routine? Well, this routine I'm explaining is each step of the routine, I'm getting practice doing this skill, this executive function. While I see it clearly modeled, there's a class sample, there's all these models around the room because students have the same portfolios. And what you're saying, Janelle, over time, that repetition, not because I keep teaching goal setting or keep teaching organization, it's the third step of the routine. I'm going to do it 180 times at least this school year, just in this one class.
Yeah.
What else do we have, Sarah?
I really want to jump into chapter 2 because my favorite quote also fits what this Adrian put in a thing about time cards, and it made me think. I have a lot of schools that are well, I don't have a lot. A lot of schools are talking about college and career readiness.
Mm-hmm.
And in chapter 2, you talk about Robert Belfan's quote: in moving to college and career readiness for all, we must now teach some skills formerly learned by students on their own. All students need lessons in modeling of study and work skills like time and task management, note taking, and assignment completion strategies. So
Mm-hmm.
often you hear young employees complaining that their boss is nagging them because they don't know how to do some of the basic functions of life.
Yeah.
And imagine if we taught those skills of that routine, because you very much have a routine at work. And I just want to talk about that connection to moving from a school based system to employment, and how
Yeah.
those executive function skills being taught during the K-12 system are going to benefit them in their college and career readiness.
Yeah, there's no question that it will benefit them, and you seem to increasingly hear industry saying, we don't, outside of certain specialized industries, like I hope the nurse that's taking care of me went to nursing school. Like there's some basic stuff I hope you got, right? So not to say, same thing with education. Like there's to say that, career focused programs aren't important. I'm not saying that. But in certain industries, it's like, no, we want a quote unquote well rounded individual and we will invest in that, whatever that is. That well rounded, yeah, relationships, got to be able to engage people, but so much of it is just executive functioning. So if you
Yeah.
find yourself in a new role, that's that transferable competency. You're going to excel, and it's more important now than ever as certain industries are quickly becoming obsolete with AI and generative AI. And we don't like you've heard this, right? That many of the jobs of the future don't even exist yet. We don't even know what they are. And I always raise my hand in the back of the room. I'm like, so then our content and curriculum, is it really all about that? If we don't even know what future we're preparing them for, I am arguing for now more than ever we need to prioritize executive functions so that when I find myself in that new reality, whatever it might be, I'm adaptable. I'm flexible. I can do this. That's that sense of agency. So, college and career readiness, absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting in my work interfacing with colleges. So, we work with colleges, both 2 year and 4 year as well. And uh, it's a really interesting like train wreck a lot of times nexus because you have students, let's look at the community college level, not all but some students that may feel like I'm not quite ready for 4 year or whatever, right? Find themselves in a community college setting or even a 4 year college setting, but they don't really know how, they don't have that sense of studentness yet. They don't know how to do school, and they find themselves interfacing with a teaching staff that has absolutely no pedagogical training. They didn't go. They're content experts. They might have their PhD in whatever it is they're teaching, but they don't know how to teach. Right? And again, I'm overgeneralizing here, and so you find
Sure.
this kind of fragile. I used to refer to them not to their faces, but my fragile graduates and non-graduates. Like you're moving on, you can go to communities, but I don't think you're ready for that. And you get into that scenario. Well, you're in college now. You got to be able to make it. And the students who have those, I mean, the birthday note, it's those students that are like, I can do this. I can figure this out. So
What does the birthday note mean?
did I mention the birthday note?
No.
Oh,
Did I
maybe I
miss it?
didn't. No, I forgive me. I recorded a podcast right before we jumped on. I thought I told the story
Tell us
here.
what the
Did I not
birthday
tell that
note
story?
is.
I thought it was right here. So it was my birthday in March,
Happy
and I
birthday.
did. Yeah, thanks. Um, wow, so sorry. And my student from ninth grade. She's now fully in her career. So I don't even know.
Wait,
I didn't ask. What?
Sarah says you've said it. A student sent you a note on your birthday.
Yeah, you did.
Yes.
You
They made
said
their
it.
own
Oh,
binder.
I missed it.
Oh,
I
okay, good. I
apologize.
was like, I swear I said that. Did I really say that on that podcast right before I
Thank
jumped
you
on
to the
here?
chat for saving us a repeat. I
Transfer. Well,
apologize.
that's a good story. I could totally tell it again. But
It's
anyway,
okay,
just
Sarah.
that whole idea of it's just one funny story about things transferring. But when we look at college and career readiness, of course, content and curriculum, it's paramount. The stuff we're teaching and learning, right? But
How often, I mean, how much can we push in when there's a little bit of chaos within the kid, in the routine, in the movement from one class to another in elementary school? That's really challenging for kids. Those first two
absolutely.
weeks of school are rough behaviorally because they don't know what to expect. They're lost, they're confused, it's so hard. I don't know how much of it could be resolved by really creating a systematic routine
Mhm.
between grade levels and
Yeah, between
between,
grade levels and classes in
schools. Yeah.
secondary. Yeah, I tell the story of a middle school. I was speaking at a district symposium, and it was housed at a middle school in this huge, big auditorium. Odd for a middle school to have such a big auditorium. The whole district met there, and before I was on my way in to where we were meeting, where I was giving this keynote address, and there I saw their bell schedule on the wall, and I'm not exaggerating. I had to stop and take a double take. So I was like, "Am I reading that right?" I mean, I get the privilege of visiting a lot of schools. They had 10 class periods plus lunch every day, 5 days a week. Yeah, I did the same thing. I was like, whoa. And this is a 6, 7, 8. And I asked the district, it was kind of a call to action a little bit. Of course, a teacher can't, yeah, we're going to change the bell schedule. Like, and they even looked exacerbated, the look you had, Sarah, when I said that. And I said, well, let's just think about this for a moment through that cognitive load lens. Because every year up until this sixth grade year, I was probably in one self contained class with one or more teachers, and they got to know me and loved on me and my family, hopefully. And that's been school. And the data is already very clear that the transition to middle school, same thing with the ninth grade transition, and same thing the transition to college, and to your point, from there to career, the data is clear that's problematic for a lot of our learners. So we already know it's a big transition. And now I've gone from one environment to 10. So I'm already here where there's big kids and lockers and all this, and I'm going to 10 different classes in 10 different places with 10 different teachers, with 10
Right.
different subjects, with 10 different routines, if any, 10 different expectations, if any. So different. Put my kiddos in there, multi-language learners, and now I'm having to translate. Like the cognitive load is just too much, and I'm just don't have the capacity left to monitor myself, my behavior, stay engaged, right? And so, what if, to your point, all those differences were siloed by definition in our industry, right? But if collective teacher efficacy has the largest effect size pretty consistently, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, everybody go look up Visible Learning, John Hattie, effect size. It's really fascinating. Meta analyses trying to answer one question: what helps students be successful? All students, right?
Right.
And one of the thing that sits usually at the top is collective teacher efficacy, which is if we're all in this together, it's going to benefit students. But how do we get collective if we're so siloed by definition? Well, clarity, modeling, and routine consistent across grade levels and across classes that doesn't interfere with my instruction, it's totally possible because it doesn't infringe upon your subject area or your grade level. So
That was perfect. We're going to end with this last comment.
I
And
can't believe we're out
Adrian
of time
Wagner, I
already.
know, but then Janelle's going to cut us off right at the perfect
I know,
time.
I can see
So
her. She's lifting at
Adrian
her phone.
Wagner brought up something very important. And as a little side note, there is a resource on the Padlet that supports this. But I have
Okay.
found that in the past 13 years of teaching, I've seen a decrease in parent engagement. And many parents I have worked with struggle themselves with executive
Mm-hmm.
function. So if they lack
Mm-hmm.
the skill, then their child needs it in the classroom in primary grades. I agree. And however, how many teachers do not get to interact, or how many teachers do not get to interact with parents until the first 6 weeks of school when there might be a parent show up for a conference? If we have relationships with parents, then we would be able to know how important it is to support executive function skills. In Head Start, I used to get to home visit, and you would walk in the door and you would go ding, ding, ding. You would
Mm-hmm.
understand when there was, you know, stuff everywhere and everything was in chaos and nobody was working. Maybe child's going to need, and this was of course preschool, but you
Sure.
understood the home life, you understood, it just built deep understanding for what the need might be for that student, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is important. If you haven't met the parent, don't know what the background is, well, you bring up in your book about assumptions for
Mm-hmm.
students. And so that's what I would like to close out on. I want to talk about belonging and I want to talk about assumptions, what assumptions we're making and how we create an, an environment for belonging for students using this routine model from executive functions.
Mm-hmm. That you want to close with that? That we could spend a whole
Yeah,
hour on that. That's great,
you're
Sarah.
gonna have to give the
Um,
briefest one of your life.
I want to piggyback real quick because Ryan put a comment in
Oh,
the
that was
chat
good too.
about a school structure there's no question that family relationships are absolute. This whole thing that we do called education, when you boil it all down to its essence, is a messy human to human endeavor. That's all it is. And
Hmm.
that's between you and the students, that's between you and the family and their kids. It's humans. And so therefore it's fallible. And I want to be clear that we can't necessarily put the expectation on the teacher to bridge that gap if there's not something in place with the school. So if there's a mandated or strongly encouraged family visit, an open house, about well timed at the beginning, then just even starting that relationship is that much more realistic for a teacher. A high school teacher, I'd have 160 families, right? There's no way I'm going to, even if I reached out to two or three a day, send them an email or
Yeah.
phone call. I mean, it's still months, right, to the point of this. But I just want to encourage, yes, families, those relationships matter. I can tell you this, educators on the call, at Organized Binder, we have a bilingual guide for families that goes home. The student gets that bundle the first week of school or whenever they roll it out, and it goes home and it explains the whole program. Here's how we're going to start. Here's how we organize ourselves. Can you check in with your kid on their table of contents? Can you? So it's this communication piece. It's a clarity for the parents, but it is that way of bringing them in, and they love it. If your families know that you're working on the whole kiddo, they tend to be like, oh, it's, they I can just say they love it. But to your multifaceted question, Sarah, about belonging in the classroom through this routine. Yeah, that's a good one. And it's part of it that I really appreciate is that if students have, and I mentioned it a little bit, we all have this same portfolio. We have this routine that we engage in collectively, regardless of how you're doing with the content. And too often in the modern classroom, success in the classroom is tied entirely to content, such that if I'm struggling with the content, I might not feel like I'm part of this community, or, like I may not feel included or like I'm belonging because I'm struggling, right? And I don't want to be here. But if I can switch that narrative and say, hey, you can engage in the routine with your portfolio, I'm going to hold you accountable to do so. And it's okay if the content is a challenge right now. Okay. We're going to address that too, because that's what we're doing here. But it switches that, and there's a sense of belonging when I know what to do and I can do it, and I'm doing it with my peers. And if you've read these first few chapters, I tell the story of the gold stars, and I'm going to celebrate that as the content area teacher. Sometimes publicly, sometimes not. Hey, way to go. Good job. Like, you're building in this sense of belonging. And then the ending routine of each class period or the school day is the student writing to me. Talk to me about how this landed. I'm working really hard to help you be successful, and I can't rely on homework. It's
Yeah.
a inaccurate, most of the time, formative assessment. It's inequitable for sure, and it's unreliable. So just do it right here in the class. Just talk to me. What's going on with you, kiddo? I'm going to read it and I'm going to comment back. Right. So if that's part of the routine, and the routine is making for this sense of belonging, like, I can do this. I look like everybody else. I'm doing
Yes.
it, and I have a D in the class. That's cool. I don't care. Like, I'm praising you for keeping your binder together. And the truth is, you're going to be more successful, even if it is tough. But then I get to read. I'm not grading. Of course, I'm grading homework and classwork, but I'm reading. I'm getting to know you as a human being every single day on a weekly basis if it's organized binder, because the exit ticket is not a sustainable practice. I can read it every day if I want, but if I just don't have time, I'm going to read them at the end of the week or over the weekend. I'm going to hand it back. And I'm hearing from your voice to me, just talking to me. And you talk about belonging and relationships. And I tell quite a few stories in the book of interventions, things going on with kids that I would have never known, but they knew. I want you to think about this, and maybe we can end with it. That concluding routine is so powerful, because think about what it communicates to a young person, that this busy adult is going to take my 5 reflections, comments, things I'm learning, what's confusing, whatever, and they're going to read them and comment on them and hand them back to me the next week. It's the only place in the whole thing that takes time outside of class
Hmm.
compared to stuff you're already doing. Well, it
Yeah.
communicates something powerful, because it's different than grading homework. It's different than grading classwork, which we do and we have to do, right? There's formative feedback there. It communicates one thing: I care about you and I want you to be successful. And my friend Josh Stamper wrote a book called The Language of Behavior. Just look at behavior as communication. And he has a great quote in that book, co authored it with Charlie Peck. He said, "The way to the brain is through the heart." This is a messy human to human endeavor. And if kids don't feel cared for and valued for all their messiness and their differences and their defiance and their off taskness and their on task, all of it, we're not going to be successful. And part of that is belonging and feeling known, even if I'm struggling with the content. If that's all a byproduct of routine, oh, and by the way, they're practicing their executive functions. I mean, I say it in the book, like win, win, win.
Yes.
Janelle's going to jump in now. I can just see it. She was leaning over her screen. Mitch, you're going on too long.
Actually, I was leaning in because it connects so deeply with what we talk about
I know.
through the Supporting Innovative Practices project so often, and how being in an inclusive environment, we want students to feel experiences of belonging.
Yeah.
And everything you just described are some of those core dimensions of what it means for students to truly belong. And this is
To
for
be
all students, right?
right, right, right. And it's funny. Those are the kids that are, you're my favorite teacher. That was my favorite class. And I'm like, based on your grades, I'm not sure. It's that you really, we have a relationship and you care. Those are the things that stick. We don't, let's just be honest. And I'll just speak from high school. All of us, we remember some maybe of what we learned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of it is, if it's a subject, it's because we have an intrinsic love for biology and I just ate it all up. Like, yeah. But most of the time, what we remember is relationships, our peer relationships, our teacher relationships. And if I don't feel cared for, they're not going to remember you.
Yeah, yeah. The way we feel, it certainly has a big factor in how we engage and how we show up.
Mm.
Well, with that being said, I want to compliment every single person
Yeah,
on this webinar this evening for the way that they showed up. I'm
totally.
just so impressed by the chat, but your time, we so value your thoughts, your energy, your insights, sharing with one another through conversation in the chat was really remarkable and
Mhm.
inspiring. And thank you to Mitch and Sarah for helping us keep that conversation going in a way that allowed for a safe learning environment and allowed us to show up the way that we did.